This week in Greater Brisbane, billion-dollar quantum computing projects, Olympic transport pressure, housing slowdown warnings, robot birds, and Kazoos. We'll also look at new concerns around Brisbane's housing market, major transport and infrastructure updates on the controversial flood mapping debate in Logan, and why Brisbane City Council says it has officially declared war on potholes. This update is sponsored by Royalty Rewards and YB Painting Services, both offering something special for viewers of the channel, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's get updated. Let's start with one of the biggest future economy stories of the week. Plans for what PsiQuantum hopes will become the world's first commercially useful large-scale quantum computer have officially shifted from near Brisbane Airport to Moreton Bay. Unlike traditional computers, which process information using binary bits, ones and zeros, quantum computers use quantum bits, or qubits, potentially allowing them to solve some highly specialized problems that would be impractical for even today's most powerful supercomputers. Supporters say the technology could eventually help solve extremely complex problems in areas like drug discovery, climate modeling, advanced manufacturing, logistics, AI, and cybersecurity. Although commercially useful large-scale quantum computing still remains technically unproven. PsiQuantum, the Silicon Valley company backed by almost $1 billion in combined state and federal support, will now build the project at Moreton Bay Central in Petrie instead of near the Brisbane Airport precinct. And this is about far more than just one building. The project is being framed as the foundation of a broader advanced technology and manufacturing hub, sitting alongside the University of the Sunshine Coast campus, a planned TAFE Advanced Manufacturing Centre, and future Olympic infrastructure nearby. Supporters say this could help position southeast Queensland as a serious player in future industries and advanced computing. Critics, however, are questioning both the scale of taxpayer investment and the fact the project was able to move through a faster approval pathway without a full public consultation process because the site is within a priority development area. There's also broader skepticism around quantum computing itself, with some arguing governments may be betting huge sums on technology that still remains commercially unproven at large scale. But proponents argue Australia risks falling behind globally if it doesn't invest heavily in emerging technologies. And the broader quantum ecosystem around the project also expanded this week, with PsiQuantum officially launching a new test and validation lab at Griffith University's Nathan campus. The facility includes advanced cryogenic systems designed to cool and test quantum chips, and is expected to help train engineers, physicists, and STEM students while supporting development of the larger utility-scale quantum computer project. Meanwhile, internationally, PsiQuantum is reportedly in line for a proposed US federal incentive package worth around $100 million under America's CHIPS and Science Act, highlighting how strategically important quantum computing is increasingly becoming globally. One thing this story really highlights is how aggressively regions like Moreton Bay are now trying to reposition themselves, not just as commuter suburbs, but as centres for advanced industry, research and future technology. Meanwhile, Queensland's energy transition also continued accelerating this week, with the state government announcing 4 major battery storage projects had reached significant milestones. The projects together would provide around 940 megawatts of storage capacity, theoretically enough to supply close to 1 million homes at peak demand for limited periods. One of the major projects is the Brendale Supernode battery in Moreton Bay. Supporters say large-scale batteries are becoming increasingly important for stabilizing the grid as more renewable energy comes online and for reducing pressure during evening peak demand periods. But those that oppose them argue batteries alone do not solve longer-term generation and reliability challenges. The government is also linking the projects to expected reductions in household power bills next financial year, although electricity pricing is influenced by many factors beyond battery storage alone. And still on major industry and Olympic-era construction, Australia's largest reinforced steel manufacturer, InfraBuild, announced plans to expand its Brisbane operations ahead of the enormous infrastructure pipeline leading into 2032. The company says demand for steel is surging as Queensland enters what it describes as the biggest construction cycle in the state's history. Production capacity at facilities in Eagle Farm and Hemmant will increase, with more jobs expected as part of the expansion. That ties into another announcement this week from Brisbane City Council, which says it's moving to secure long-term quarry operations through to and beyond 2032 to help meet growing demand for construction materials across southeast Queensland. Council says demand for rock and aggregate is rapidly increasing because of the huge pipeline of transport, road and Olympic-related projects. Interestingly though, there's also criticism emerging around that story because Brisbane City Council had previously promised the Mount Cootha quarry site would eventually transition into public recreational space as quarrying wound down. Opposition councillors have raised concerns that extending quarry operations could delay those long-term public space plans. And speaking of future Brisbane, a major luxury apartment proposal in Tenerife may have produced one of the most unusual development details Brisbane has seen in a while. The proposed Cavcorp development includes what may be Australia's first residential humanoid robot charging room, specifically mentioning Tesla's Optimus robots. Yep. The proposal also includes rooftop tennis courts, wellness facilities, plunge pools, golf simulators, and a large public laneway linking the Riverwalk to the Gasworks precinct. While much of Brisbane's housing debate currently focuses on affordability and supply pressures, developers are clearly still betting heavily on a booming luxury apartment market, targeting affluent downsizers and interstate buyers. Now, of course, rapid growth also creates pressure, and Brisbane's transport system was back in the spotlight this week. Brisbane City Council says more than 10 million trips have now been taken on Brisbane Metro bus services since permanent operations began last year. The council says bus patronage has risen significantly alongside the introduction of the new bus network and 50-cent fares. But Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner also issued a warning this week, saying Brisbane has only around 12 to 18 months to secure further federal funding if metro expansions to the north and east are to be completed before the 2032 Olympics. A leaked draft of Council's updated Transport Legacy Plan reportedly suggests some proposed metro extensions may not be operational by 2031 as previously hoped. Metro bus fans argue the system is now clearly driving strong patronage growth, but others still point to the project's major cost blowouts and delays, and the final cost climbing far above original estimates. There was also another significant public transport story this week involving accessibility concerns at Central Station. The only lift servicing platforms 5 and 6 will reportedly be out of operation until late next year while major replacement works are carried out. Disability advocates say the disruption creates major challenges not just for wheelchair users but also for elderly passengers, people with prams and travellers with luggage. Particularly frustrating is the fact that on Sundays, trains are frequently redirected through those platforms during maintenance work elsewhere in the station, effectively making Central inaccessible for some passengers for much of the day. Queensland Rail says the works are necessary and part of broader infrastructure upgrades, but the story has reignited wider concerns around accessibility gaps across the rail network. And staying with infrastructure upgrades, Premier David Crisafulli strongly hinted this week that upgrades to Suncorp Stadium, including a possible capacity increase of more than 6,000 seats, could be announced in the upcoming state budget. The Premier said the works would likely be completed well before the 2032 Olympics. At the same time, concerns are continuing around Brisbane's accommodation shortage ahead of the Games. Industry figures are warning the city is already losing major events because of limited hotel room availability, with Brisbane reportedly facing a potential shortfall of more than 11,000 hotel rooms by 2032. The Premier, however, says he remains optimistic the private sector will deliver enough accommodation in time. Got a spare bedroom? They're not getting mine. I need it to record these update videos. And after the recent wet weather, Brisbane City Council says it has officially declared war on potholes. Council says crews filled more than 1,800 potholes in just 5 days during what it called the Big Fill. At peak pace, the potholes were reportedly being repaired at a rate of roughly 1 every 2 minutes. Labor councillors, however, say the figures actually highlight the poor condition of Brisbane's roads and argue council needs a more proactive long-term road maintenance strategy. Either way, I suspect most Brisbane drivers won't need much convincing that potholes have become a fairly noticeable issue lately. If you run a local business that thrives on repeat business here in Greater Brisbane, this might be worth a look. There's a new app that's been developed by a local Brisbane company called Royalty Rewards. It's designed to help small, independently owned businesses bring customers back more often through a simple digital loyalty system. It also helps customers discover and support other local businesses, all in one place. I've put together a full breakdown of how it works, who it's for, and whether it could make sense for your business. You'll find that linked in the video description. And there's currently a limited free offer available ahead of the launch, so if you're interested, it's worth checking out sooner rather than later. Now picking up where we left off, talking about getting around the city, Brisbane City Council has revealed 2 possible options for finally fixing what cycling advocates describe as one of the biggest missing links in Brisbane's bike network along Sylvan Road in Toowong. The section connects the Bicentennial Bikeway with the Western Freeway Bikeway and has long been criticised for safety concerns and conflict between cyclists and vehicles. Public consultation is now underway on 2 proposed separated bike lane designs. There was also more debate this week around e-bikes and e-mobility devices after footage showed a large group of riders travelling through Brisbane's CBD, performing wheelies and blocking traffic. One important clarification here though, many of the devices visible in the footage appeared to be illegal high-powered electric motorcycles rather than legal e-bikes. The incident comes ahead of major new Queensland e-mobility laws coming into effect in July. Now let's move into housing, planning and development. And there were mixed signals this week around southeast Queensland's housing market. A major federal and state infrastructure deal worth around $2.4 billion was announced to help unlock tens of thousands of new homes in growth areas including Warraba near Caboolture and southern Thornlands in the Redlands. The funding would help deliver roads, water, sewerage and power infrastructure needed to support new housing developments. Supporters say this is exactly the sort of large-scale infrastructure investment needed to increase supply and improve affordability. But some argue governments remain too focused on outer suburban growth while failing to sufficiently increase density in existing urban areas closer to jobs and transport. At the same time, though, there are increasing signs Brisbane's property market may finally be slowing. Several analysts this week suggested Brisbane could potentially experience price falls of between 5 and 10% following interest rate rises, weaker confidence, and recent federal tax reform debates. Auction clearance rates have dropped sharply in recent weeks, while some data suggests asking prices are beginning to soften. Importantly, though, not everyone agrees a major downturn is imminent. Some analysts still point to strong long-term population growth and Olympic-related investment supporting Brisbane over the longer term. There was also another smaller but significant housing story this week. Brisbane City Council announced part of a council depot site at Zillmere would be converted into 16 modular social and community homes through a partnership with Housing for Change. The homes are intended primarily to support women experiencing housing insecurity. Council says it will cover subdivision and development application costs to help accelerate the project. Some see it as a practical example of councils using surplus land to support additional housing supply. But others argue much larger reforms and investment are still needed to meaningfully address housing affordability and homelessness pressures. And speaking of planning conflicts, a potentially very significant debate is now emerging in Logan around flood mapping. Logan City Council has now formally resolved to ask the Queensland Government to change how extremely rare flood events are used in planning maps. The debate centres around the probable maximum flood, essentially the most extreme theoretical flood event possible. An independent review commissioned by Council found the flood study itself was developed using accepted national standards and industry practices. However, the review also raised questions around whether these very rare and extreme scenarios should carry as much weight in development planning restrictions affecting landowners. Mayor John Raven says current flood overlays may be creating unnecessary alarm and impractical outcomes for some residents and property owners. Council is now seeking permission from the state government to remove these rare extreme flood scenarios from development planning overlays while still using them for emergency management and disaster planning. The review also found that incorporating very old historical flood events from the late 1800s and 1940s, which were not included in the modelling due to limited historical data reliability, could potentially reduce some modelled flood levels, although the report stresses these findings remain preliminary. Importantly though, the review also notes newer national climate guidance released last year may actually strengthen some future flood assumptions rather than weaken them. Supporters of the proposed changes argue current flood overlays can unfairly impact property owners, development opportunities and housing supply. Critics, however, warn Queensland has repeatedly underestimated flood risk historically and argue removing extreme flood scenarios from planning decisions could create major long-term risks as climate pressures intensify. And with Logan among the fastest growing regions in southeast Queensland, this debate sits right at the intersection of housing growth, climate adaptation, infrastructure planning and property rights. Meanwhile, in the Redlands, controversy continues around Ormiston College's approved redevelopment plans, which will involve the removal of hundreds of trees within a koala habitat corridor. The project was approved through a state process after earlier resistance from Redlands City Council. Environment campaigners argue the site forms part of an important koala corridor. The school, however, says the project is necessary to support growing enrolments and maintains the area is primarily a transit corridor rather than a major breeding habitat. The debate escalated this week after graffiti appeared at the school referencing the Koala campaign, though advocacy groups quickly distanced themselves from the vandalism. If you appreciate all the work I put into bringing you the videos and podcasts on this channel, I'd really appreciate any support you can give through Buy Me a Coffee, or you can join the community of supporters that are members of the channel, which gets you extra content such as extended podcasts and some behind-the-scenes updates. Your support is much appreciated. Now let's shift gears a bit. Construction has officially begun on the first stage of the Graceville Riverside Parklands revitalisation project along the Brisbane River and Oxley Creek. The upgrades will include a new nature playground inspired by the river environment, upgraded picnic areas, event lawns, electric barbecues, and thousands of native plants aimed at improving riverbank stability and wildlife habitat. Future stages are also planned to include new facilities for water-based recreation and community events. The project forms part of the much larger long-term Oxley Creek Transformation Initiative, which aims to gradually reshape the corridor into a major environmental and lifestyle destination over the coming decades. Further north, Moreton Bay has officially broken ground on a major new regional playground and splash park at Centenary Lakes in Caboolture. The project will include large water play areas, climbing structures, sensory and accessible play equipment, shaded picnic areas, and upgraded facilities designed to make the park more usable year-round for families. Council says the redevelopment is intended to create a major regional destination as population growth continues across the northern corridor. And like a lot of recent projects across southeast Queensland, it reflects how councils are increasingly investing not just in roads and housing, but also in lifestyle infrastructure aimed at attracting and retaining young families. Councils are spending big bucks on this kind of thing, but you can save money if you want to breathe new life into your home or workspace, thanks to channel sponsor YB Painting. They recently picked up 2 first and 3 second place awards at the Master Painters Australia Queensland Awards for 2025, which gives you an idea of the standard they're working at. They offer fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on their work, so you know exactly what you're getting up front. You can claim an exclusive 10% discount by scanning the QR code on screen or through the link in the video description. Moreton Bay also marked World Turtle Day this week, highlighting the region's importance as a habitat for several marine turtle species. 6 of the world's 7 marine turtle species have been reported in Moreton Bay waters, with nesting areas around Bribie Island and parts of the peninsula coastline. The story also comes only days after new research found extremely high concentrations of microplastics in some Brisbane waterways, particularly Kedron Brook and Bulimba Creek. Researchers found thousands of tiny plastic particles per kilogram of creek sediment. Scientists say the long-term health impacts of microplastics are still being studied, but concern is growing globally around their presence throughout ecosystems and even in human tissue. There was also a significant social services announcement this week, with the opening of a new domestic and family violence Hope Hub at Orion Springfield Central. The centre aims to provide a more accessible one-stop shop for counselling, housing support, legal assistance and recovery services for victim survivors. Interestingly, the hub has deliberately been located inside a shopping centre to reduce stigma and improve accessibility. And with Springfield and Ripley among Queensland's fastest growing urban corridors, the story also highlights the growing pressure to expand social and community services alongside housing and infrastructure growth. And Ipswich is preparing for another Festival of Horsepower this June, with this year marking the 160th anniversary of the Ipswich Cup. The broader festival includes drag racing, superbikes, GT racing and community events across the city. Council says more than 60,000 people attended Festival of Horsepower events last year, which reinforces how heavily Ipswich is leaning into its motorsport and event identity these days. And finally this week, after Ipswich recently announced its trombone world record attempt, Moreton Bay is now preparing for a Bee Gees Kazoo flash mob at Redcliffe. The event forms part of Moreton Bay's Make Music Month celebrations and will take place near Bee Gees Way. For anyone unaware of the connection there, the Bee Gees spent part of their childhood living in Redcliffe before later becoming global music icons. And somehow the Kazoo mob may still not be the strangest story of the week, because Moreton Bay also announced it's trialling a robotic bird of prey drone designed to protect strawberry farms from nuisance birds. The robo-bird mimics the movement of a predator bird in an attempt to stop flocks damaging crops. So, just to summarise, Southeast Queensland is building quantum computers, debating Olympic transport funding, deploying robot predator birds, and organising Bee Gees Kazoo flash mobs. Kinda demonstrates what a mixed bag this region is giving us at the moment. Who said Brisbane is boring? Anyway, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Maybe check out one of the Brisbane Channel's podcasts in this playlist, and keep your eye out for the next one coming soon. I'm done.